Okay, well, thank you for joining us for this event. My name is Bill Leggett, and I'm a bookseller at Powell's Books. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. One of the many great events we're looking forward to is with Kendra Atlee-Work in conversation with Caitlin Meyer on Sunday, August 16th. And they'll discuss Atlee-Work's memoir titled Miracle Country. Please consider following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. As well, if you haven't already done so, please sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. But today, we're honored to welcome Jill McCorkle in conversation with Jayne Anne Phillips about Jill's novel, Hieroglyphics. Jill McCorkle has created a long and wonderful collection of novels and short stories. Her previous novel, Life After Life, was a New York Times bestseller. And she has received the New England Booksellers Award, the John Dos Passos Prize for Excellence in Literature, and the North Carolina Award for Literature. She's currently a faculty member of the Bennington College Writing Seminars and is affiliated with the MFA program at North Carolina State University. Jill is joined in conversation by Jayne Anne Phillips, who is the author of 5 novels, the most recent being Quiet Dell, and 2 widely anthologized story collections, Fast Lanes and Black Tickets. Her work has won the Sue Kaufman Prize for First Fiction, the Heartland Prize, and the New England Book Award. Jayne Anne is Professor Emerita at Rutgers University, Newark, where she designed, founded, and directed their MFA program. This evening's event, including a conversation, will also have an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question that you'd like to know the answer to as well, please consider upvoting that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please consider supporting both Jill McCorkle and Powell's by purchasing a copy of Hieroglyphics. A link to buy the book will be shared in the chat this evening. Jill and Jayne Anne, thank you for joining us and have a great event.
Thank you, Bill. Great to be here.
Very welcome.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here with Jill virtually. So should I start off with a question?
Sure. It's great to see you. Thank you for doing this.
Sure. So I don't know if the audience knows a little bit about the book. Maybe we should talk a little bit about do you want to sort of encapsulate it or something for?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, I can do that. There are 4 point of view characters, Lil and Frank, an elderly married couple. And what brought them together as young people is that they both had lost parents in tragic accidents as children. So a marriage founded on tragedy. Her mother basically went out one night not saying where she was going, and it turns out she was at the Coconut Grove nightclub in Boston in 1942, the night of the tragic fire. And then almost a year later, his father was traveling from the South back to New England on a train that crashed in my native North Carolina county. So I grew up hearing the story of that train wreck because as an adolescent, my dad had gone, as many people did, to see the aftermath and all the scattered debris that happened around Christmas time. And so I was always riveted by the story. It paralyzed the community, but it also rallied the community to turn out. And what you would come across anytime you read about it were these long lists that cataloged how they identified people, and it was a tag in a coat or something in a pocket or a tie tack, a ring. And then, as you know, I lived many years in Boston, which is how I know Jayne Anne. And, I get there and I hear people refer to the Coconut Grove fire in a very similar way. It was an accident that paralyzed the community, changed the community, and kind of served as a before and an after. People used it as a way to to measure time. So Lil and Frank have that in their backgrounds, and they now, after living in Boston for years, they have retired in North Carolina. And then the other family involved is a young single mother named Shelley, who's a little bit at her wit's end.
She happened to be living in the house where Frank grew up after the accident. And one of the really interesting things about the book is that Frank has this before and after life that's very definite, because at age 10, the accident happens. His father is killed. His mother's also on the train, 6 months pregnant, but escapes death by having been in the restroom at the moment of the crash. And people in the town actually opened their homes to people who were injured because there was not enough room in the hospitals. And Frank's mother ended up staying in the home of a man that she later marries. And rather than her going back to the old life, she brings Frank, her son, into the new life and into a life with a stepfather in a totally different place. And he really has to leave his entire life behind. But then as a retired person, their daughter is in the area, and that's why they've sort of come back. He's obsessed with going and looking at this house where he lived after the accident until he went away, to college or whatever. And that is the house where Shelley lives.
Yes. And Shelley is quite frazzled.
Fragile.
Yes, frazzled and fragile. Shelley has left a lot of disturbing things in her past and really has closed all the doors to it. She works as a court stenographer, and she has a 6-year-old son named Harvey, who has a really vivid imagination but is doing a lot of acting out in the aftermath of his dad leaving.
Right. And the book sort of opens as Frank just drives up in the car with Lil to Shelley's front door and goes to the door and says, "I used to live here. Can I come in?"
Right.
And Shelley, of course, is kind of very freaked out and says no. So at this point, I'm just going to ask my first question.
Okay.
Lil and Frank bond over loss, and their losses specifically tie them into larger histories. I thought this was a really interesting aspect of the book, that these big historical events are kind of in the background. Lil's mother dies on the November 28th, 1942 Coconut Grove fire in Boston. And for those who don't know about this, that's a nightclub. And it was a nightclub that was sort of magical. It had full of paper palm trees and sparkly ceiling, and a spark lit it on fire. And how many victims were there, Jill? Hundreds, right?
Like close to 500, 400.
Frank's father, who was a surgeon on his way back to Boston, dies in a December 15th, 1943 passenger train crash in rural North Carolina. As in the Broadway musical Come From Away, sort of reminded me of that, the town is overwhelmed by the hundreds of dead and injured, which include Frank's pregnant mother. These are both very public tragedies, like the one we're all living through now, except that ours seems kind of endless. But in terms of writing Hieroglyphics, Jill, how did the confluence of these two real tragedies first occur to you as the emotional backdrop of the book? I mean, did the characters come first, or were you sort of thinking about these two events?
I have been intrigued by both events for a long time, and had read what I could find about both, and so I was always interested, but I was thinking, am I going to write about someone who was actually there, as a main character? And that just never took off. It felt right that these catastrophes are the backdrop, because then you get the sense of time. They are in the past, but they've left such an imprint on the generation of children, you know, who were affected, like Lil and Frank, left without a parent, forced to grow up really fast. And so it provided me this genealogical chain of their parents, Lil and Frank, and then of course Lil and Frank's children. And of course Harvey is even a younger generation than that. So I was able to span a lot of time. And Frank has taught archaeology courses, so he's always thinking of things as a kind of dig. And so they are layered time-wise, right down to the physical space where, you know, Frank and Harvey share boyhood earth.
Mm-hmm. And there is actually a kind of archaeological dig in the book, which is a kind of root cellar or cellar behind, well, the stepfather's name is Preston, behind Preston's house that he's built kind of brick by brick. And it's about, what, 6 feet deep. And it was Frank's sort of hideout or camp or whatever. And that was where he hid certain things, the most important being a jar full of crushed pennies and different other things that he picked up at the crash site on the railroad track where his father died.
Yes.
One other thing about the book that I really liked is that there really is a sense of the value of each individual life, because even though you're concentrating on these two people who were the parents of Lil and Frank, every one of those 500 people in the Coconut Grove fire who died left behind this kind of void that generations are going to have to sort of carry with them. Right. The way that, you know, our parents' histories become a part of our own histories.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw it the other week, because I noticed, you know, when I lived there reading the Globe, and a friend had sent me one several years ago, but you would continue to see obituaries for survivors, you know, someone who at the last minute chose not to be there that night. Or the other day, it was a gentleman who was a tap dancer and got out and, you know, was among the survivors. So it's just continued historically. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, the way that the male characters kind of react and the way that the female characters react, and the differences in the way that they carry their memories. Lil is are they about 85?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lil is writing a kind of journal. She's always written a journal. And in some of her sections, you see journal entries from years ago. And then you see journal entries that she's writing right now since she has moved to North Carolina. And she has been experiencing a lot of distance from Frank, who hasn't been completely open about his need to go to that cellar space and his need to, well, to really kind of, what is the word that our shrink, not that we share, to resolve something, to come to an emotional resolution about his past. But I loved the contrast between Lil, who's of an older generation, a mother who parented with her own losses kind of suppressed, and Shelley, who came from a very different background. I mean, Lil lost her mother when she was it 7?
Yeah, 10.
Same age as Frank.
Mm-hmm.
But she remembers her childhood as being very happy up until that point, and was very close to her mother. Whereas Shelley comes really from a more abusive background. So Lil remarks at one point, she's thinking about the Bible, and she remarks, "Mary pondered in her heart. That's what mothers do, they ponder." Frank quotes words from the Book of the Dead, and that phrase is, "Oh, heart of my mother." He quotes that more than once in the novel. And the New York Times review of Hieroglyphics by Sylvia Brownrigg had an interesting quote: "The maternal hearts of Lil and Shelley are the central force of Hieroglyphics," which is an interesting way to think about. But yet they come from such contrasting lives. Lil has lived with the mystery and sadness of her mother's death, because as you said, she hadn't told her family where she was going that night. So when they were called and told that she was one of the victims, they were completely at sea. The first thing that her husband said was, "What was she doing there?" And it turns out that she taught dance classes. So she might have been teaching a dance class, or she might have been there with someone. And there's actually a fantastic scene when Lil's father is talking to one of his wife's friends, and he's sort of asking her, "Do you think she was there with someone?" And the friend says, "I don't know, but I suspect." And Lil, as a 10 or 11-year-old, confronts them both and says, "Well, she might have been there making up a surprise for so-and-so, or she might have been, sort of just saying she's not going to let them say that about her mother because they really don't know." So Lil has lived with that mystery, while Shelley has actually fled her mother, who did not protect her children from her abusive husband. And Shelley says of herself, "As soon as she found a way to leave, she did. And nobody looked for her, and she never looked back." I guess the author is saying that of Shelley. So I wondered if you could talk a little about writing or discovering Lil and Shelley, and like which one came first, and how did they develop so differently?
Yeah, and maybe you want me to read a little of Lil?
Oh, I'd love you to.
Because the voices are very different. I think for this novel, Lil's voice definitely came first, and Shelley is that kind of voice I always like to have on the back burner. She's the rant voice. So when I myself feel like writing a rant, I never know whose mouth it will come out of, and Shelley became a wonderful vessel. But this is a little bit of Lil. We all are haunted by something we did or didn't do, and the passing years either add to the weight or diminish it. Mine have diminished, perhaps because I've spent time thinking about it all. It might sound silly, but I see these bits and pieces as my contribution to evolution, the unearthing and dusting of the prints and markers that led me here. Some seem to bulldoze right through life and up to their headstones, but I want to take my time. I want to find the right words. I imagine my recipient to be you two, or perhaps your children, and I hope this is so, rather than some stranger who comes in and hoists old boxes into a dumpster or rakes away the remainders of my life like the sad debris in the aftermath of a flood or fire. I'll never get over the sight of what we left behind at our home of over 50 years to move down here. A mountain of cast-off things, old towels and linens, papers and books and shoes and pots, side tables and lamps, hoses and hose, packets of seeds I meant to plant, and a rubber squeak toy that had been safely hidden away in the back of my closet by one of the dogs long dead. And so much more. Things not needed, things long forgotten, cans of cream of whatever soup and V8 juice, why? And peas that had sat there forgotten for years, and things that never should have been there in the first place, like tuna helper, or those things in my closet, like that geometric print mini dress I bought in the 60s, hoping to look like Petula Clark or Judy Carn, a perky pixie kind of dress that I never had the nerve to wear, and instead looked at it there at the back of the closet for years, along with a wiglet and a long frosted fall and some jackets with shoulders resembling a football player or Victorian monarch. We divided it all into goodwill, consignment, recycle, or landfill. But there were also the things I couldn't let go of: letters, reminders, souvenirs, and I'm taking my time, relieved when I find something that might have gotten lost in that mountain of debris, like one of your drawings from first grade, or the stub from a movie I'd forgotten I even saw, or a note from my father. When the moving van pulled away that afternoon and we got in the car and turned southward, the space within the car seemed so empty, vacant. Our suitcases and silver chest in the trunk, an overnight bag and thermos of coffee on the back seat. And I had that terrible feeling that I had forgotten something, because I was thinking of all the times the car was filled with you two, your belongings, your music and voices, the dogs, while going to school or on vacation, or just to the grocery store, where I bought all of those things that I then put on the shelf there in our dimly lit pantry on the red gingham contact paper I spent one snowy afternoon 40 years ago cutting and sticking in place. All those things that I put there and then forgot about. It's mysterious how fluid time has become for me. I wake and pour a glass and have no idea what I'll find. In short, I'm homesick and I'm time sick. I would be lying not to say that. It's possible to feel content and resolved and still be homesick. I miss all that no longer is, which is why I paste and piece all these scraps together. Sometimes I hold a ticket or photo, a piece of paper, while willing myself back to where I first held it. I know that might sound silly, but it's what I do. I want to hear your young voices, the dog scratching to come in. I want to call my father on the telephone, finger in that rotary dial, one number at a time. TW3 3642. Let me take this playbill and arrive at the theater, or this receipt and find myself there in the produce aisle of Star Market. Then after the show, after I check out, after I sit and let the car warm up, I drive those familiar streets home and find everything just as I left it, the kitchen door creaking behind me. So that's Lil. Shelley's voice is very different.
Well, let's hear from Shelley.
I'll give, I think maybe
I
we'll
think to
do
hear
the
the
back
two
to
of them
back.
close together is great.
Okay, let me see. There are so many things Shelley wishes she could say, things that fight to get on the tongue only to be swallowed back down in the name of composure or decency or respect. As a child is why she loved that book, Go Dog Go, and why she has enjoyed reading it to her boys. Do you like my hat? The dogs at the dog party ask, and one repeatedly says, I do not. Instead of that polite girl thing so many were raised to do, well, it's a hat like I've never seen before, and what a hat that is. Oh my, that's a hat all right. And aren't you sweet to even think to ask my opinion? I'm so flattered and honored that you thought of me. Nice girls equal enablers. Now there are whole libraries of books about this. Do you like my hat? Hell no, it looks like shit. Doesn't she look just like a little doll? Oh God, yes, a little voodoo doll with rusty pins stuck all about the mouth. These cases get to her this way, and she has to vent somewhere so she won't screw up and accidentally shout out in the courtroom. She likes to take shorthand the old-fashioned way with a piece of paper and a pencil, a method that requires her alert attention and doesn't leave room for mistakes or for other thoughts to enter her mind. A problem she has had her whole life, sometimes several thoughts coming at her all at one time, so that she consciously has to slow down, and she tells herself, slow down, only she can't afford to do that while at work, because just that little soothing repetition could cost her a very important sentence or admission or piece of evidence. Her job is very stressful this way.
Right, because she is hard on herself, but given her background, she's actually doing very well. I mean, she's a single mom. She has two sons. Her older son is actually in college, and she really has picked herself up by her bootstraps and learned how to be a court stenographer. And so she has this very stressful job where she has to constantly keep up. So Shelley's sons, Jason and Harvey, have not had stable lives, though Shelley has found her skill and, has become a court stenographer. Jason's in college. Unbeknownst to Shelley, he's on his own quest, which we will not say too much. Harvey, at age 6, for me, is the emotional fulcrum of the novel. He was born with a mild cleft palate, had surgery, but he still has a small scar on his lip that he likes to cover with a variety of fake mustaches. He's scared, he wets the bed, he's obsessed with dark stories of murders and urban legends and paranormal tales, and scares his classmates by repeating them. Shelley has had, it seemed like a dozen meetings with teachers of Harvey's, even though he's only in first grade. He's driving Shelley crazy because she can't make the world right for him. Yet the reader, through Harvey's point of view sections, recognizes and delights in him. He reminds me of Toni Morrison's comment about Huckleberry Finn, quote, "The authority of a child's voice cut for its renegade tongue and sharp intelligence." And we definitely have the feeling that Harvey has a kind of sharp intelligence that hasn't been able to turn itself out into the world. Instead, he's sort of sucking in all of these urban legends and tales of murder. And of course, his mother is right at that moment writing about a murder as a court stenographer. So kids like Harvey are tough to parent and harder to write. Well, maybe not harder to write, probably tougher to parent, but difficult to write. So how did you find Harvey's voice? It really is like no other voice of a kid that I've ever read.
I'll show you, I've got some fake mustaches now. This is a pencil mustache. As soon as I gave Harvey that collection of fake mustaches, he sort of opened up for me,
So you knew before you gave him those that he had the cleft palate?
No, I sort of, all of that came about because, I was thinking again, back to the list, what identifies us, our objects, our scars, and that's his scar. And I just imagine this cute little boy who up to age 5, I mean, Shelley even says at one point, so happy until he realized other people were looking at his scar or that he had been noticed. And so suddenly, it's like the Garden of Eden. I mean, suddenly he's been exposed in a way that's hurtful and makes him self-conscious. And so even though it's very funny to see this little, like 3-foot guy with a handlebar mustache, it's, as soon as I had that piece of him, and then it was a lot of fun because he loves very sweet things like Einstein, the world's smallest horse, but he's also like heard all about Lizzie Borden and the Menendez brothers, and he's got a turd collection of all these animal turds he's collected. And I do think you could divide, and you know this from knowing me many years. I mean, I think we could split the world, those people who outgrew 5th grade humor and those who did not. And I'm among those who did not. And so it was a lot of fun to indulge Harvey. I love having elderly characters, and I love having children, because I think at either end of that spectrum, we're dealing with filters that aren't working. With the kid, the frontal lobe is far from having closed. I mean, he has no control or filter, and then on the other end, things are wearing out. And so there's this I think, a really beautiful kind of honesty that comes out of the mouths in those situations.
Well, could we hear a little bit of Harvey?
Sure, sure. Let me find Harvey. This is an early Harvey scene, just to get a sampling of his voice. Here we go. Harvey would be scared at night if he didn't have Peggy. She's fat and warm and she snores, and sometimes her paws move like she's chasing something, like she will chase something if she needs to, and Harvey wakes her up to tell her to do it. But sometimes Harvey is the only one awake, and so he whispers in Peggy's ear to wake up, just to make sure she will do it when he needs her to. Her ear stinks a little in a good way, like how her neck smells under her collar, kind of like the school cafeteria and those big rolls on spaghetti day. His teacher held one up to the principal and said, "Do you think we feed these children enough starch? And does this sauce really count as a vegetable? Really?" Harvey's teacher said, "Really, really," when she thought you were lying. "So you already did your work," she would say. "Really? You really want me to believe that?" And they did want her to believe that, because she's the youngest teacher at the school and has a convertible and a boyfriend who makes beer. Somebody asked, did her boyfriend know she always eats lunch with Mr. Stone, the man who teaches second grade and runs the summer camp Harvey's mom is making him go to? The same kid asked, why didn't she dump her boyfriend and go with Mr. Stone? She already has everything anybody wants, a car and a dog, a pit bull mix named Susie, but Mr. Stone can dance and wears cool shoes. Harvey kisses Peggy and smells inside her big soft ear. He keeps his eyes closed and pulls Peggy tight when he hears the back door open and close. He knew it would. Peggy doesn't wake up and Harvey's mom doesn't wake up. Just Harvey knows someone's in the house and in the hall, and whoever it is stops and stands in the door, just like last time. He wants to look, but is scared to, because there's some ghost that'll blind you for looking and cut out your tongue too. So he just breathes real quiet into Peggy's soft ear and waits.
I'm thinking about a scene toward the end of the book, and I don't think I'm going to be giving anything, well, maybe I'm giving something away, but not the really important secrets. So missing mothers, but also missing fathers sort of thread through the book. Frank's missing father, Shelley's missing father, Jason's missing father, Harvey's missing father. Yet Frank has not been a missing father. He has sort of remade his life and been a present father. And near the end of his journey, he and Harvey finally meet and have a brief, very skillfully rendered conversation. Harvey thinks Frank is a ghost, but Frank says he's just an old man who lived here when I was a boy. Then he tells a story Harvey reports to us about how, quote, these are in Harvey's reporting this to us. People know everything before they get born, and then an angel comes along and mashes her finger on your lip to make you forget it all. That sucks, Harvey says. She mashed me way too hard. You must have known more than most, Frank tells him, and now you get to spend a lifetime remembering it all. And to me, that was so much like a kind of benediction. It's not that everything is resolved, because it never is, but all of these equally rounded characters, through your alchemy and magic by the end of the book, are moving on past these terrible burdens, not by rejecting them, but by almost finally taking them in and living past them. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how and when you found that place of benediction. I know you have to do this without giving the book away. When you were writing Hieroglyphics, because it really has a wonderful emotional resonance to it.
Well, I think I just saw all of them on this kind of journey. And it is a journey about memory. And obviously, Lil and Frank, um, you know, you're 85, so the timeline for present and future is quite small. It's the looking back over the broad expanse of the past. And so much of what is they are absorbed by is the past. And Shelley is someone who's just frozen trying to outrun the past, which almost never works. It's just always nipping at the heels, and we watch her in that race. But then you have a child who, though already, both a physical scar and this loss in his life, that his father is not present. He's already at age 6 come through quite a bit. And yet his timeline is, this active present and a whole lot of future. And so the whole time I was thinking about time. At one point, Frank is talking about how in his office he always kept that timeline around the ceiling, and this little tiny half of an inch or quarter of an inch of a man's life. And so I was thinking a lot about that, and a lot about what we leave behind and what is and is not decipherable for those people who might find it. I mean, Lil is kind of editing her life at certain junctures. And I was thinking a lot about not just language and what gets lost with different forms of language, but the objects in our lives that tell a story.
I want to remind people who are with us to put up questions, because we're definitely leaving time for that. Now, one of the things that remains a mystery, at least I didn't find an answer to this question. Lil and Frank have a word, a special word that's always been a secret only for the two of them. It sort of harkens back to Houdini and the idea that Houdini and his wife were trying to give each other a way to recognize each other in the afterlife. Like if one of them died before the other, what word would come into their minds or whatever to signal the influence of the one who's passed on. So we never hear what the word is between Frank and Lil. Now, I think the word is hieroglyphics. Don't answer that.
That's good. That's good. That's good. No, that the story from life that brought that idea. I mean, other than being intrigued by the Houdinis, obviously, but I was in high school and my dad worked at the post office and worked on the window, and he came home one night really feeling like it was very emotional that because this gentleman he did not know shows up at the window and said to him, "Is everything copacetic?" And my dad said the only person he had ever heard use that word was his father. And this man was kind of dressed very neatly like his father. And he never saw him again. He was a stranger in town. And he just was very moved by it, and really felt that he had this wonderful connection. And so I've just always loved that story and the power of the spoken word. And so I do have it happen to Lil's dad, when they're at the soda fountain and the waitress uses the word Lulu, meaning silly. And he has this emotional response. So that's where the whole idea, and then it was just a lot of fun to think Because we all have a kind of shorthand with our loved ones. You know, not just nicknames, but you know, you tell just this much of a story and everybody laughs. You don't even have to tell the story.
Right.
And yet, for those in the future, they won't know the story. You know, if there's not somebody there to remember it and tell it, or some way that it's recorded. We're being recorded right now, Jayne Anne. I just saw the wonderful Lisa Kupalo made a comment in there. So thank you for being here, Lisa. Should I start looking? Should we dip into the question?
Take a look. Take a look.
And Richard Bausch is there too. Let's see. Oh, this is Richard on Lisa's computer. Thank you, Dick. Great. Thank you for being here, Dick. There is a question. Let's see. Oh, a UNC person. Can you talk about your influences there and how you found your voice or voices? Yes, and very, very sad that we lost Daphne Athis. She was such a force in that department for so many years, but certainly my experience in that UNC program, Max Steele, who was there for a very long time, he was my first teacher. And then the wonderful Lee Smith was my teacher after Max. And then Lewis Rubin, who actually founded Algonquin Books. And so was both my teacher and publisher in those early years. So thank you for that question. Max Steele is the person I have to always give credit in my classes. I have this thing, and obviously it's true in this novel. I have this thing, if it's not one thing, it's your mother, you know, because if there's a missing piece in a story, quite often if you start looking for the mother, you'll find some answers. And Max Steele once told us that we would never be the writers we were supposed to be until we had dealt with our mother issues. And, you know, as a 19-year-old, I'm thinking, what? That sounds so crazy. And then every year, I would think, he's right. He's right. He's very right. But are there, oh, I think I see another question. I'm not very good at this. This is from Fred. Talking about privileged sensations that recall a buried memory, hieroglyphic signs. What triggers the memories of your characters? That is a very nice, wonderful question. Thank you. I gave them all these objects that trigger, and in fact, I happen to have right here, I spent some time on eBay because I could not find my own, but Lil's skate key. Frank's Captain Midnight decoder badge that he's eager to get. I also have a ring, Harvey's little ring that translates Klingon. So I had a lot of fun with these objects, and a lot of things that I possessed, but also, you know, I would scroll things for like dolls from Lil's age. And I just had a lot of fun familiarizing myself with the music she would have been hearing, the movies they would have gone to see, the dolls on their shelf.
Something is listening to the same songs and sort of really trying to enter a time. Now I want to just ask you, this book has both a before and an after life, at least in my mind, in that there's a connection to your previous novel, which you might
Oh,
want to
yes.
talk about.
Oh yes, I need to tell that because my last novel, Life After Life, I had quite a few readers upset with me that I left this murder unsolved. And at the time, I actively made that choice. I knew it was going to go unsolved because I think there are those
murders do go unsolved.
They do go unsolved. And I made the realistic choice for that novel that there is this kind of, there are people who remain invisible to the public at large, and they do disappear. And that was the statement I was making, but a lot of people were very upset. So I would hear, how could you do that? And I was thinking, well, I didn't see it as me doing it. I saw it more as the logical end. But anyway, in this novel, as a result, the backdrop of Shelley's life, the court case that she's recording, is the trial. So those people who read Life After Life.
In other words, the murder took place at the assisted living facility where Life After Life was set.
Mm-hmm.
So that we get to hear in a very interesting way through Shelley's court stenography. And well, we won't go into the mistake she makes that almost loses her
Right.
job. So we really get a sense of the judge and the atmosphere in the courtroom and the end scene where we get well, I'm not going to go into that, but it's very triumphant.
No, but people who read Life After Life, all of those characters are basically coming on a bus to the trial every day. It's their theater. So they're like being bused to the courthouse.
And the murder victim was their girl. They call her our girl. That's how she's referred to. And she leaves behind a child.
Yes.
So that's another kind of parallel. But I think sometimes, this is just what your readers did for Life After Life, but when I read the end of the book, I really wanted there to continue a relationship between Frank, this older man, and Shelley and her sons, because Frank is, that benediction scene, as I call it, when they have that conversation about the angel, it's just Harvey walks out of the woods in a different way.
Oh,
he just has been given such a gift in this little moment of conversation. And it's as though Harvey and Frank have this meeting of souls almost.
They do.
Different points of, in their lives. So in my mind, I'm somehow thinking that Shelley comes to accept him and see that he might be a great.
Well, Shelley is definitely somebody I would love to revisit. I'm looking, there are a couple of more questions.
Sorry, yeah.
Minrose Gwen is hi, Minrose. Thank you for being here. Let's see. How did you decide that Lil should be a first-person narrator when the others aren't? I wanted that first-person kind of present energy so that when we're revisiting those memories and early journal entries and all, I wanted it to feel like a kind of time travel. And rather than the distant look back, I really had fun in those moments, getting the voice of a much younger Lil.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what we're all seeing in this pandemic is how much we miss the most annoying or boring day, like wouldn't you love to be sitting in the movie theater pissed off that the person beside you's hogging the arms, of your chair. All these things that once you're deprived, wasn't William Maxwell had that line about writing out of deprivation. And I think there's a way that, you know, seeing Lil in that young voice, she might be flustered or upset about something that's going on in the daily life. And yet it, you know, it's the kind of thing that it's why she can't throw away the receipt from, you know, like Stop and Shop that she finds, because it was a day when she bought both baby food and her father's shaving cream. So
Right.
for her, it represents that time. But there's one more. Amy Phillips, is that your
brilliant question?
Is that your Amy?
That's my niece, Amy.
Oh, well, thank you, Amy. Okay, so Amy's question.
Great.
You mentioned how much you enjoy giving voices to the elderly and young characters. Is there an age, gender, race of character in this or any of your other novels that you find most challenging to bring to life? If so, why do you suppose that is? I have trouble with men. It's a challenge, but oh, and Jayne Anne, you have always done men so well.
No, I'm a man. I'm just kidding.
But you do. I mean, you know, Machine Dreams. You have you've always, but I find men to be challenging. And so as soon as I can find what is the passion, I mean, you talked about, you know, Frank with Heart of My Mother. You know, as soon as I branched into what he was teaching and sort of saw him in a different way, it became easier. I had the vocabulary for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted his voice to sound very different. And I see Michael McKenzie is here, and I forgot to show the book, which I promised him.
Oh, he remind you to show the book. Yeah.
And I meant to have Quiet Dell or something here beside me, and I don't. But they have all of Jayne Anne's books as well. How are we doing on time?
It's 8:53, so we have time for another question from the audience, or another, if you have a short reading that you want to do, or if you want me to ask another question, whatever you would like.
Let's see if there's another question. No, we have answered. We've answered all the questions.
And we can so seldom say that in life.
Yes, it is. I was going to see who the attendees are. Oh, I figured out how to.
Oh, can you take the participants?
Yes, Linda Dunn, I see you. Michael McKenzie Monrose, Nicole Nelson.
Are you seeing pictures?
Your brother is here. Russell Phillips is here.
Are you seeing names or pictures?
I see names.
Oh.
It's like, I'm going to date myself. Did you have Romper Room in West Virginia? And she would come home with the looking glass.
Remember, what was her name? Miss Virginia?
And she never said Jill, you know, but she would say, I see Susie and Bobby. And that's kind of what Zoom feels like.
That's great. My brother actually he's out there.
He's out there. Oh, and here Linda Dunn this can be our last question.
Okay, great.
Do you miss your characters once the book is published and it's all done?
Yeah.
I absolutely do. And I think it's why I keep going back and checking on them. I can definitely imagine checking on Shelley and Harvey sometime. I do miss them because they just are a part of your waking life. And you are a writer, Linda, so I think you've probably experienced that too. Jayne Anne, you want to take a crack at that one?
Oh, well.
Except scary people.
They continue to live exactly where I left them. I don't really think about them acting out in the future because for me, they're really enclosed in this world. And they come to represent period of my life, I think, because I take so long for each book and I'm sort of spend so much time with them. But
Do
yeah,
you
it's
have a title for the new one?
Pardon?
Do you have a title for the
I
new
do. It's a deep, dark secret.
Okay.
The title is not a deep, dark secret. I'm not telling anyone the title. I'm very
That's like one time I told my mother that there was a review or something, or I had an article in Real Simple, and she said, well, I want to read it. Where is it? I said, it's in Real Simple. I said, it's Real Simple. And she said, okay, what's the name? It was like a long who's on first. Oh. Well, I think Bill is going to come back out here.
We have to give Bill time to come back. So
We have to give Bill time. We've had a wonderful time, and thank you to everybody who zoomed in for this.
Right, the cocktails will be served now. Each and every one of you.
Well, thank you both, and thank you everyone for joining us at Powell's for this event. It was a pleasure to host Jill McCorkle and Jayne Anne Phillips. Please consider purchasing a copy of Jill's book, Hieroglyphics, by visiting us at powells.com. While you are there, please be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events, and we look forward to seeing you at another one of our events soon. And
Thank you.
Jill and Jayne, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Have a good night.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Good.
Bye, Jayne Anne. Thank you for doing
Bye,
this.
Jill.
Goodbye.
Bye, Bill. Thank you. Thanks to Powell's.